Not this much.
Doing his best to shift the scene and subject away from the John Tower nomination failure, President Bush talked up the war on drugs today during his trip to New York. He did so before an audience of federal drug enforcement agents, men and women increasingly outgunned and overwhelmed by legions of desperate addicts and violent traffickers who are taking a heavy toll on them and on us. Harold Dow reports the view of the drug plague as seen by the president today and from the DEA trenches.
It's the first time a president has ever visited a Federal Drug Enforcement Administration field office to talk to the men and women who are fighting America's drug war.
Ladies and gentlemen, we do intend to prevail. The scourge will end. I will lead the fight. Bill Bennett, our nation's first drug czar, tenacious, unafraid, going to be right there at my side.
Morale in the DEA's New York office was badly in need of a boost. Despite a record number of narcotics arrests in the city, more than 1,500 in the last 9 weeks, agents on the streets feel they are making little progress.
Right now, unfortunately in New York, we are losing the war on drugs.
The execution-style murder of an undercover agent in New York last week made that clear.
The enemy out there fights back. The enemy out there refuses to be taken alive sometimes. The enemy is running from us. In some instances, the enemy is turning around and shooting at us.
And it's not just happening in New York. In the nation's capital, the murder rate is already double what it was last year at this time. And casualties are up in Detroit, Los Angeles, and other cities. Law enforcement officials say drugs are behind the huge jump in murders, particularly crack cocaine. It's a $110 billion a year industry, and federal agents know they're fighting a war. They admit that they're afraid sometimes, afraid of being shot. But the head of the DEA office here in New York has a greater fear.
I'll tell you what I feel the most, that I feel the most in 1991. We'll be looking back on the good old days of 1989. And I'll tell you something, right now we think the sky's falling in New York.
The president's 80-minute visit was encouraging, but agents say unless it is followed by the money for drug education, treatment facilities, and more prison space, there's no chance of winning the drug war. Harold Dow, CBS News, New York.
Drugs and death, the inseparable combination. That will be the subject later tonight of 48 Hours. 48 hours in the nation's murder capital, Washington, D.C. That report from the streets will be at 7 Central Time.
Every time I see
policies of South Africa's white minority government are about to claim new casualties. Martha Teichner reports.
The woodcutters of Grabo are tangled in the classic South African dilemma. The community they have built over a generation is in the way of a holiday home development for whites only. The woodcutters have been ordered to move out of their sturdy stone cottages, but because they are black, there is no place for them to go in the town where their families were born, where they make a living. This is where the woodcutters have been told they have to move. An already overcrowded black township miles away, built on a vast sandy wasteland, not a tree in sight.
My heart feels weak from this thing. I feel angry.
For John Mbangi, part of the pain is that families will be split up. Black members of the woodcutters clan have married mixed-race so-called colored women who will stay at Grabo.
They're going to have their lives absolutely destroyed. And that is what's so unjust about it. They're simply pawns in this terribly unjust system.
But so is Justin Lewis, the neighboring apple farmer who bought the land and evicted the woodcutters. He used to export Granny Smith apples to the United States until American sanctions against South Africa cut off that market. In order to make his payments, he had to subdivide.
Because of sanctions from America, we have to look at alternative uses for the land. And at the end of the day, these people are the ones that suffer.
Lewis is sympathetic to the woodcutters. He has even offered to build them new houses. But the government says there is no place for them here, even though the town of Grabo is surrounded by hundreds of thousands of acres of state-owned forest.
The trouble is just about any satisfactory solution to the problem is against the law. And in spite of a lot of well-intentioned efforts, nobody has figured out a way to beat the system.
Their legal advisors have told the woodcutters their case would be used to challenge that system. But reform comes slowly in South Africa. And for the woodcutters, their families and their homes, time is running out. Martha Teichner, CBS News, Grabo.
Like a cure for the common cold. Chicken soup may make the cold sufferer feel better. Just last month, 60% of doctors surveyed said they had recommended soup to people with colds. But today, researchers announced a discovery that may take medical science beyond mother's soup in the search for relief. CBS News medical correspondent Susan Spencer reports.
Hollywood always has found the common cold uncommonly funny. But the average person who has more than 100 colds in a lifetime rarely finds the experience very amusing.
I feel like hell.
I mean, you feel awful. You just feel miserable.
In Boston today, an announcement hailed as a breakthrough. News that help could be on the way. Researchers have figured out the exact way most cold viruses attack, identifying the precise part of the cell that 80% of them go for, on their hateful way to producing that sniffling, sneezing, ache-all-over feeling.
The implication of this discovery is that eventually it may be possible from this molecule to develop a drug that prevents the common cold.
And boy, would Madison Avenue like that.
Ever notice how even the smallest cold turns everything into a big effort?
Already, vulnerable, sneezing Americans spend $1.8 billion on cold remedies each year. But they're treating the symptoms, not the cause. If one could stop a cold before it started,
I would make a beeline for the first shop that was selling it.
With this new information, researchers have been able to prevent cold infections in the test tube. But other scientists urge caution when it comes to predictions about people.
Well, I think you're talking many, many years.
Many, many years?
Yes.
Still?
Still many years. I would say 5 to 10, probably.
But don't be discouraged. In science's eternal quest for a cure, today's discovery is clearly nothing to sneeze at. Susan Spencer, CBS News, Washington.
And that's the CBS Evening News. Again, we hope you'll stay tuned for 48 hours in the nation's drug murder capital, Washington, D.C. That's coming up soon at 8 o'clock, 7 Central Time. Until then, Dan Rather. See you again soon.
Murder capital. The Washington tourists don't see. Fighting a deadly drug war. Armed and dangerous. 48 hours tonight.
This is CBS.